Hi, my name's Mireille, and this story, it starts with a rescue and ends with a betrayal I never saw coming. They said I was too intense, too emotional, not a real soldier. But when I saved a man's life with the skills they all mocked, that wasn't the victory. The real battle came after, at my own dinner table. My mother called it drama. My father offered me hush money. My sister, she told the world I was unstable. They rewrote my life while I was still living it. But the worst part? The silence they expected me to keep. The silence they counted on to bury the truth. And still, I kept speaking. Want to know what happened when I finally told the truth louder than their lies? I could feel the sun prickling at the back of my neck as I sat in that white plastic folding chair, the kind that always rocks just a little too much on uneven ground. My name was about to be called. The dean shuffled a stack of certificates, the microphone squealed slightly, and someone 2 rows down snapped a picture with their phone. But none of that mattered. I wasn't wearing a cap and gown like the others. Instead, I was dressed in the navy blue EMT cadet uniform that had become my second skin over the last year. Practical, clean, purposeful. It wasn't for show. It was a statement. A quiet one maybe, but no less defiant. My mom, Vera, was sitting in the 3rd row, waving dramatically at someone I didn't know. Her jewelry caught the light just enough to announce that she was the mother of someone successful, at least in her own eyes. And beside her sat Silas, my older brother, with his ever-perfect smirk and relaxed posture that said, "I didn't even try, and look how well I turned out, the family darling." The inside pocket of my jacket held my grandfather's old military medal, stitched in, right over my heart. He'd been the only one who believed in what I was doing, the only one who ever called me brave, even before I did anything brave. As the speaker droned on about future contributions to the community, I kept my eyes down, letting the rhythm of the words wash over me, but my thoughts were louder. "You've earned this, Mireille. You worked the night shifts, the weekend drills, you did it without them." And then, my name was called. The applause was polite. 1 or 2 people clapped a little louder, maybe someone from my training cohort. I walked up, received my certificate, and turned to face the crowd for just a second. That's when it happened. "You're not a real soldier, you know. This isn't a war zone," my mom said, loud enough for the people behind her to hear. A few stifled chuckles followed. She smiled, like it was some kind of joke. My hands tightened around the certificate, and I felt the cheap plastic water bottle in my grip give way with a soft crack. I didn't look at her. I didn't say a word. But inside, something fractured. I wasn't trying to be a soldier, I thought. I just wanted to matter. 3 years ago, I had stood in our kitchen holding an empty envelope addressed to me. I had applied to the EMT program that spring, my one real chance. But weeks passed and no response came. Finally, I called the admissions office, only to learn they had no record of my application. It took another month before I found the truth. I opened the bottom drawer of Vera's filing cabinet and saw the torn envelope. My name still legible on the front. The application inside had been replaced, substituted with one for an interior design program I had never signed. When I confronted her, she didn't even deny it. "I was protecting you," she said. "You'd burn out before you even passed the first certification. Trust me, I did you a favor." So I nodded. I said nothing. And then, quietly, I enrolled again. I worked nights. Trained in secret, paid for it myself. I stopped asking for rides or approval. I became invisible, except in the places that mattered. At dinner that night, Vera picked a fancy restaurant with starched tablecloths and too many forks. A celebration, she called it. For me, but every word out of her mouth was about Silas, his latest promotion, his dating life, his real education at a state university. "You know, Silas graduated from a real university," she said, smiling sweetly as the waiter poured our water. I didn't argue. I didn't even eat. The plate in front of me was full, perfectly plated, untouched. Just like every time before. I watched the way Silas chuckled and nodded along, How Dad stirred his drink and Vera recounted stories that all ended with a punchline that made me look small. If I vanished tomorrow, they'd just say I wasn't ambitious enough, I thought. My phone buzzed quietly under the table, a short, urgent vibration. I glanced down. Dispatch alert. Accident on the North Rim Trail. Injuries reported. Closest unit requested. That was me. Before I could react, Vera's voice cut through again. Sit down. Don't embarrass us. But this time, I didn't freeze. I stood. My chair scraped against the hardwood floor loud enough to make heads turn, every eye on me. That was the moment I knew. If I stayed quiet one more time, someone would die. The restaurant door clicked shut behind me, sealing the clatter and laughter inside like a memory I no longer belonged to. My heels hit the pavement faster than my thoughts could form. I didn't wait for an explanation or approval. I had none to give. The message had said, possible head trauma and steep trail, but that was all I needed. My legs moved on instinct. By the time I reached the trailhead just outside Sedona, sweat had begun to collect under my collar. The summer sun hovered low, but the heat still clung to everything like plastic wrap. A group of volunteers, mostly tourists in borrowed reflective vests, clustered by a dusty pickup truck. They looked more like a hiking club than a rescue team. Who's the EMT? One man asked, scanning the newcomers. He was tall, tan, mid-40s maybe, with aviator sunglasses that stayed on even in the growing shade. I raised my hand. Mireille, trainee but certified for field triage. He glanced me up and down. You're dressed for a potluck, not a rescue. I didn't bother to correct him. My emergency kit thudded against my hip, compact, worn, and exactly what would matter in 10 minutes. The man introduced himself as Kenji, a local volunteer. We're taking the shortcut trail. It's quicker. I stepped forward. There's been recent erosion near that route. Heavy rain last week. The ridge might not hold. Kenji raised an eyebrow. You read that in a textbook? I ran drills on that slope last month. 2 near misses. A few people chuckled softly. One woman whispered something that made the man beside her smirk. I took a breath. Let them laugh. I wasn't here for them. Kenji pointed and moved forward. It's quicker, he repeated. They followed. I didn't. Not 5 minutes later, the scream tore through the trees. Everyone stopped. A crash echoed down the canyon. Stone against stone, a brittle snap, and then silence. Someone cried out, He went over! Kenji froze. So did the others. No one moved. Except me. I dropped my bag, snapped it open, and grabbed gauze, wraps, splints. I didn't ask for help. I didn't wait. I moved toward the edge and scrambled down the embankment, bracing my feet against the sliding gravel. There he was. Mid-50s, pale skin, blood trickling from his scalp, one leg bent wrong, still breathing but barely. My hands moved without asking permission from my brain. Head stabilized, pressure applied, airway checked, pulse counted. Stay with me, I murmured, though he couldn't hear. I whispered anyway, for both our sakes. Kenji appeared above me at the ridge, eyes wide. What do you need? Now he asked. Call the chopper. Give them coordinates. Tell them he has possible cranial trauma and a femur fracture. He hesitated. Now, I snapped. He ran. By the time the helicopter rotors cut through the sky, the man was stable enough to lift. The ranger who stepped out looked at the setup and whistled. Who did this? I stood, legs shaking just slightly. Mireille, EMT trainee, he nodded. We'll need your name for the report. Good work. Kenji looked at me but said nothing. His sunglasses were off now, tucked into his collar. The others kept glancing my way. Some nodded. One clapped me gently on the back as I walked past. The dirt stuck to my skin, and I didn't care. When I pushed open the restaurant door again, the air conditioning hit me like a slap. Vera turned, squinted, and wrinkled her nose. What happened? Did someone stub a toe? I didn't answer, just sat down, ordered water. Silas passed me a napkin silently. No one else spoke. Inside my head, my voice whispered, clear as sunlight. If I had waited for their approval, that man would have died. And that was only the beginning of the silences I'd learned to fill myself. Dinner the night after the rescue felt like being caught in a slow-moving avalanche, everything appearing calm until something deep inside cracked and the world started shifting beneath your feet. We were seated around the dining table like a painting of family unity, Vera at the head, Callum to her right, Silas on her left, and me at the far end, barely more than a shadow. The roast chicken was golden and perfect, of course. The silverware gleamed. It always did. Nothing in this house ever reflected the chaos beneath. "Well," Vera said, slicing into her chicken like she was delivering a verdict, "I heard someone's little wilderness cosplay made the local paper." Her voice rang with false sweetness. Silas gave a low chuckle, unsure if it was safe to laugh. Dad kept his eyes on his wine glass. "You didn't really save anyone," Vera added, twirling her fork. "The professionals did the real work. You just got dirty for the drama." I didn't respond. I'd learned years ago that silence was the only language she noticed, though she never understood it. Instead, I let my eyes drift over the table, Callum's jaw tightening ever so slightly, Silas refilling his water just to avoid my gaze. Not one of them said anything. Not one. Inside me, something throbbed. Not pain exactly. It was like biting down on a chipped tooth and pretending you hadn't felt it. The chicken on my plate stayed untouched. The next morning, Dad showed up at my apartment unannounced. I was still in sweatpants, a mug of day-old coffee warming my hands, when I opened the door. He looked freshly shaved, jacket crisp, like he'd come from a meeting. Not family. Business. "Can I come in?" he asked, like a stranger unsure if he was at the right place. I nodded and moved aside. He walked in, glanced once around my tiny space, the secondhand furniture, the EMT books stacked beside the couch, and then went straight to the envelope in his pocket. "I figured you might need a little help," he said, setting it down on the table like it might burn him. "To focus. On school. Keep your head clear." I didn't touch it. "How much?" $3,000. I smiled. Not a nice one. "Thanks," I said. "That should cover the price of being invisible for another semester." His eyes narrowed. "It's not like that." "It never is," I whispered. "You know your mom," he said softly. She has a way of exaggerating." "Don't let it get to you." I picked up the envelope and walked it to the kitchen trash, dropped it in like it was yesterday's coffee grounds. He flinched. "Anything else?" I asked. Callum looked at me for a long moment. But it wasn't a father looking at his daughter. It was a man wondering how he'd lost control of the narrative. "No," he said, and walked out. Later that afternoon, I found myself sifting through the old boxes I'd refused to unpack when I moved out. Half buried beneath high school trophies and forgotten ribbons was the science fair folder from when I was 13. I had built a solar-powered water heater using black tubing, mirrors, and optimism. I'd written my own calculations, burned my fingers sealing plastic, and set it up in the backyard for weeks. It had worked. Vera said it was a waste of time, called it boyish. She didn't come to the fair. But there, in the family album from that same weekend, was a glossy 8x10 of her in a tiara and sash, winning Mrs. Southwest Hospitality. Everyone else was in the photo too, even Callum. I stared at that picture for a long time, wondering why I could remember the exact angle of the sun that day, but not a single word anyone had said to me afterward. I found my old journal wedged behind a math textbook. Its cover had faded to a dull blue. I flipped it open and read the entry from the day of the science fair. "Maybe they'll notice me if I disappear. Not all at once, just in the corners first." I touched the words like they belonged to someone else. And maybe they did. Some version of me who still believed silence would earn peace. But that version had watched a man nearly die and stayed standing when no one else could. That version had been offered money to vanish and chose the trash can. Maybe silence had raised me, but it was time I started speaking in storms. The sun over Prescott had that dry kind of heat that bakes the pavement by noon and softens tempers by mid-afternoon. Aunt Carla's backyard was wrapped in rows of white shade tents and laughter that didn't quite reach everyone. I sat alone under the smaller canopy by the fence, a lukewarm glass of lemonade in my hand and an untouched plate of potato salad sweating beside it. Across the yard, Vera stood in her crisp linen pantsuit like she was hosting a political fundraiser rather than a barbecue. She smiled the way she always did, perfectly, and with just enough edge to remind people of their place. Silas leaned against the grill, flipping burgers while making everyone laugh with a story that cast him as some misunderstood genius at work. And like always, they ate it up. My brother's charm had that kind of elasticity. It could stretch over any lie and still hold. Someone, maybe Aunt Carla, maybe one of the cousins, brought up the rescue. That EMT trainee from the trail, they said. Real hero stuff. Vera didn't miss a beat. Oh, you mean Mireille's little hiking adventure? Little hiking adventure. It wasn't rage that pushed me to stand. Not exactly. It was quieter than that, like a hinge clicking into place. I'd like to say something, I said, my voice low but clear. A few heads turned. Silas's spatula paused mid-air. Vera's smile froze, a nanosecond too late. I'm tired of being erased, I said, of pretending I don't hear it when you rewrite my story to make everyone else more comfortable. Silence, not awkward, strategic, the kind families practice for generations. I'm not angry, I added, but I won't stay quiet anymore just to keep the peace that only serves a few. Vera's eyebrow rose. Sweetheart, no one's rewriting anything. You've been under a lot of stress. Stop, I said. Don't do that. Don't make me sound unstable just because I'm telling the truth. Silas stepped forward, palms out like he was warding off a small kitchen fire. Let's all take a breath. Mireille's been working really hard, and maybe she's just a little overwhelmed. I laughed, softly, not because it was funny, but because it was exactly the script I expected. There it is, I said, the too emotional label, that old song. No one's saying that, Silas said gently. But you are, I said. You just did. Vera shook her head with theatrical sadness. You always take things so personally. I worry about how you'll survive in the real world. I saved a man's life on a trail 2 days ago, I said. That was the real world. I looked at Silas. And don't you dare try to mediate. I know Mom's already asked you to. He blinked. That small hesitation told me I'd landed the punch. She just wants things to calm down, he started. Of course she does, because if I keep speaking, the calm breaks, and heaven forbid anyone hear the truth out loud. People were watching now, cousins, in-laws, neighbors with their paper plates half lifted. It wasn't dramatic. There weren't raised voices or slammed drinks, just a quiet fracture that no one could ignore. Vera, now smiling with that patented grace, said, We're all just worried about you, honey, that's all. That's the most dangerous thing you've said all day, I replied. Because if you call your silencing worry, you get to keep doing it without feeling guilty. Silas's eyes flicked between us like a tennis match he didn't want to win. I walked away before anyone could answer. No stomp, no storm off. Just the soft crunch of my sandals against the gravel path toward the driveway. That was the first family event I left of my own choosing. No injury, no emergency excuse. Just the plain truth. I didn't belong in that choreography anymore. In the car, I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I just sat with the engine running, hands on the wheel, eyes fixed forward. You don't have to break windows to leave a house that's never had a door for you, I whispered to no one. And what I didn't know then was that walking away would start a storm that wouldn't let any of us go. Sunday dinners at the house on Evergreen Lane had always been treated like sacred rituals. Same hour, same dishes, same seats. But tonight I walked into that house knowing I would dismantle something sacred, and I didn't feel guilty, just tired. The house smelled like rosemary chicken and tension. I took my usual place, the creaky chair near the end of the table, the one Vera always said she'd replace but never did. Everyone else's seat had been upgraded over the years except mine. Sentimental value, she claimed once, but I knew better. It was less about sentiment, more about signaling who belonged and who didn't. Conversation buzzed around Silas's new real estate venture and Aunt Carla's hip replacement surgery. No one mentioned what had happened at the barbecue the week before. No one dared. I watched them pass mashed potatoes and politeness like it was a normal evening. I wanted to scream. Instead, I laid my fork down, cleared my throat softly, and said, "This will be my last dinner here." Silas choked on his water. Vera froze mid-bite. My father blinked, not in surprise but as if bracing himself. The silence that followed was oddly respectful, like they were waiting for a punchline. "I won't be coming to any more of these," I continued, my voice calm but firm. "It's not working for me." "What does that mean?" Vera's tone was clipped, professional, the voice she used when correcting a waiter or addressing a service complaint. "It means I'm stepping back from this family routine, from the expectation that I pretend everything's fine." "You're being dramatic," she replied, already waving her hand as if dismissing a mild breeze. I didn't flinch. "I've also applied for EMT jobs out of state, Oregon, New Mexico. There." The second shoe dropped. My father leaned forward as if he had something wise to say, but Vera beat him to it. "So this is about attention?" she snapped. "About being the poor, misunderstood one who runs away. You think leaving makes you what, heroic now?" Her voice sharpened like a blade. "You want applause for abandoning your family?" The twist came quick and ugly. Vera slammed her palm on the table, rattling silverware. "Ungrateful doesn't even cover it. After everything we've done." "Everything you've done," I said quietly, "was for a version of me you could manage." Silas shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between us. "Okay, maybe we should just cool down." "No," I interrupted. "We've cooled down long enough. I'm not asking for permission, I'm telling you." The room felt like it had stopped breathing. I stood, reached for my coat, and buttoned it without rushing. No drama, no door slamming, just an exhale. Vera was still shouting as I walked out, her voice growing distant with every step. But none of it touched me anymore. Outside, the porch light flickered above my head. I looked up at it, smirking. Even the house was trying to signal something. I walked down the quiet sidewalk, past trimmed hedges and familiar porches. My steps didn't falter. I didn't look back. It wasn't rebellion. It was release. They always said I was overreacting, but this time I wasn't going back to explain myself. The call came right after our morning briefing at the EMT training center in Prescott. The room still smelled like coffee and antiseptic. I had just tossed my gloves into my kit when Brian, a fellow trainee, approached me with an awkward half-smile. "Hey, if you ever want to talk, about stuff, just know I'm around, okay?" He scratched the back of his neck. I blinked. "Thanks, but what stuff?" He hesitated. Someone mentioned, you've been going through some emotional things with your family." That's what I heard anyway. It was the way he said it, carefully, like stepping around a pit of glass. I asked quietly, "Who told you that?" He shrugged. "Not sure. Think it was from something your sister posted? I didn't mean anything by it." I managed a smile. "Appreciate the concern." But my heart had already dropped. I walked out into the parking lot, phone in hand, the summer sun suddenly far too sharp. A dozen notifications later, I found it. Vera's Facebook post from 2 days ago. Public, of course. Families should lift each other. But sometimes, people want spotlights more than support. When someone rewrites their story, it's usually because they're ashamed of the truth. Emotional instability can look like independence if you squint hard enough. My name wasn't there, but it didn't have to be. I called Liana, my old college roommate, and the only person I trusted to keep screenshots without commentary. She answered on the first ring. "Hey," she said, no small talk. "You saw it, huh?" "Yeah." "There's more. Want me to send?" A silence passed. "Yeah." She forwarded 2 more screenshots, Vera's comments under someone's post about trauma and therapy. One in particular caught my eye. When someone starts blaming their family for everything, maybe what they need isn't applause, it's professional help. I know, I've read their therapy letters. Therapy letters. I sat down on the curb, fingers numb. Only one person besides me had ever read my letter aloud, the one I'd written during that dark semester after failing my first EMT exam. It wasn't even a failure, just a pause. I had been exhausted, overwhelmed, scared of becoming someone who cracked under pressure. I'd written, I feel invisible in the spaces I'm supposed to belong. If I disappeared, maybe they'd see me for once. Dad had read it one night, quietly, and told me, your vulnerability is nothing to be ashamed of. I had believed him. Now, it was paraphrased as social currency. That evening, I drove to the house in Flagstaff. No announcement, no call ahead. Just me and my breath, steadying with every mile. They were on the couch, watching a rerun of some detective show. Mom held a bowl of popcorn. Dad had a blanket tucked under his knees like it was winter. I walked in. Didn't sit. I turned off the TV. They looked up, startled. Vera's mouth opened like she was about to joke. I didn't give her the chance. You weaponized my pain, I said. Vera blinked. What are you talking about? You used what I wrote in confidence. You took pieces of my struggle and served them as warnings to the world. That's not concern. That's cruelty in disguise. Dad stood slowly. Honey, let's not make this into something it's not. We didn't mean for it to get out. It didn't leak, I said, voice calm. It was delivered. You handed it over. I turned to him. Gave her the sword. Vera's eyes welled with tears instantly. I was just trying to help people understand why you've been acting so irrational. People talk, Mireille. I needed them to know we aren't bad parents. You didn't need to protect your image. You needed to protect your daughter. But you chose differently. The popcorn bowl trembled in her hands. Callum reached out to steady it. Neither spoke again. I pulled out my house key, placed it gently on the coffee table. I'm not running away. I'm just done walking toward people who keep backing up. They didn't stop me when I walked out. No dramatic shouts, no begging, just silence. But this time, it was mine. It wasn't rebellion. It was reclamation. What they called betrayal, I was learning to call boundaries. I've read over Prompt 5 and the complete details of chapters 1 through 6, along with the outline you just provided for chapter 7. Everything is consistent, no contradictions or duplications. The timeline, characters, and emotional tone align smoothly. I will now continue with the narrative and write chapter 7 following your instructions. I watched the screen glow in the dark of my living room. It was Friday evening. Prescott. My phone vibrated again. Another notification about the family tribute post that Vera had shared. It painted me as the fragile, estranged daughter who needed healing. That paint dripped on me like a public pity parade. Sending prayers for her healing. Families are complicated, aren't they? My name wasn't there, but it didn't need to be to make me the story. I shut my laptop, trying to steady the thudding in my chest. The house was silent, my only company the hum of the fridge. I didn't cry. I didn't even allow myself that. I sat still, fingers curled around the edges of my phone, thinking, let's flip this script. The next morning when the phone rang, it was Serena. Cousin Serena, usually sweet, diplomatic, so careful with her words. Mireille, I'm sorry to say this, but Mom and Uncle Sam asked if it would be better if you didn't attend Grandma Alma's 80th birthday. Their words, might be triggering for others, hung in the air like a judgment. I thanked Serena, as I always do. Okay, thanks for letting me know. I didn't hang up. Instead, I stared at the blank screen as tears pooled behind my eyes. For a moment, the house seemed colder, emptier. Silence in this family was never neutral. It was a spotlight they preferred not to reflect into. By afternoon, I had made a decision. I sat at my desk and recorded a video. Soft lighting, not flashy. My voice collected. For years, silence felt like safety. Now I know it was my silencer. You were telling me I was overreacting. You said I needed help, but I just needed to be heard. I held up my phone, hit record, and spoke from the places I'd been hiding. I didn't name anyone. I didn't need to. When I uploaded it, I didn't wait. Within hours, messages came. Distant cousins, old classmates, even strangers. Thank you for telling your truth. Quiet DMs, shares. A few tears I couldn't see but could feel through the pixels. It wasn't loud, but it rocked my world. That night, my phone lit up with texts from Vera. How dare you go public? Her message read. I stared at the screen for a long moment before typing. You made me a story. I just changed the ending. Then there was a voicemail. You should have kept this in the family, she said. Her voice broken with hurt or accusation. I wasn't sure which. I didn't listen. I swiped up and deleted it. In my living room, the dark seemed softer now. I realized I was no longer trapped by silence. I had reclaimed my narrative. And as I locked my phone, I whispered into the quiet. If truth makes them uncomfortable, maybe it was never family I'd lost. Just an illusion. It was just past 6:30 a.m. when the ping of my phone cut through the hiss of the coffee maker. I hadn't even had my first sip when I saw the sender. A law firm in Flagstaff. The subject line was unmistakable. Notice of potential defamation. My thumb hovered over the screen. I knew who had sent it before I even opened the message. Inside, the words were sterile but sharp. According to Vera's legal representation, my video, the one calmly detailing my version of events, had caused irreparable harm to the family's reputation and must be removed. A cease and desist was requested. Failure to comply, they warned, could lead to legal action. I reread the message once, then twice. Then I laughed. Not a joyful laugh. Something drier, closer to disbelief. They want silence, I muttered aloud to my empty kitchen. And now they want to rent a lawyer to make it sound noble. The coffee tasted bitter that morning, but it wasn't the beans. Grandma Alma's number lit up my phone later that afternoon. Hi, baby, she said, her voice soft but clearer than I'd heard it in years. I braced myself. Was she going to ask me to take the video down too? To think about family harmony the way Vera always framed it? But instead, she said, you saved more than that man on the trail, you know. You saved a piece of me too. I didn't respond right away. Alma continued, I saw that video, every minute. I'm sorry I never told you how proud I am. I guess I thought it wouldn't matter. Vera always made the rules, but I want you to know, I see you. You don't need to shout to be heard anymore. You've done enough. For the first time in weeks, I felt something loosen in my chest. When Alma said she wanted to organize a family meeting, I expected it would be another kitchen table ambush. Instead, she booked the community room at the local library. Neutral ground, she called it. She even sent formal invitations, old-fashioned paper ones. I showed up in a navy blue blazer and jeans, professional but rooted in myself. The room was full. Vera sitting stiffly with a man I assumed was the lawyer, Callum, arms crossed, Silas looking down at his hands, a few cousins, Aunt Carla. Alma stood beside me. Thank you for coming, she said, then sat. I stepped forward. My palms didn't sweat, my voice didn't shake. I projected a short slideshow onto the white wall, just a few screenshots. The therapy message excerpt that had been shared without my consent, Vera's Facebook comments, dated text messages that aligned timelines. I didn't accuse. I presented. Then I spoke. I don't want revenge, I want truth, and I want accountability. Vera started to speak, something about protecting the family name, but I gently interrupted. No lawyers today, I said. This isn't a courtroom. This is a living room, finally with walls that echo. There was a long pause. Callum shifted uncomfortably. Silas still said nothing. And then, quietly, Vera said, I may have overstated some things. I was scared. You were changing. No, I said. I was returning to myself. Alma walked up beside me. She placed a hand on my shoulder. She's not the one who needs to apologize. We are. The room was still, for once. That night, back in my new apartment in Albuquerque, I stood by the window and looked out at the stars. My phone buzzed with messages, some apologies, some silence. But I no longer waited for responses to define what I already knew. They may still doubt me, I whispered into the dark. But I've learned something more important. Truth doesn't need their belief to be real. The morning air in Albuquerque felt different, softer somehow, like it had let go of something it had been holding too tightly. I noticed it as I walked down the street to my favorite corner cafe, the same path I used to avoid, afraid I'd bump into someone I knew or someone who thought they knew me. But today, my steps were steady, unhurried. There was no invisible weight on my shoulders, no tight coil in my stomach, just stillness. A rare kind, the kind you only find after surviving your own storm. I sipped coffee by the window, watching a group of joggers pass by, all neon sneakers and early ambition. The world outside hadn't changed, but something in me had. I used to think resolution came with applause, with someone finally saying, "You were right." But it didn't. It came with silence, and for once, it wasn't weaponized. That peace carried me through the day, right until I visited Alma later that afternoon. We sat in her small sunroom, the light filtering in through gauzy curtains, and she handed me a worn envelope. "I found it in Callum's desk last week," she said gently. "Figured it was meant for you." It was dated 8 months before his death. My hands shook slightly as I opened it, breath shallow. "Mireille," it began in his neat architectural script. "You always led with your own compass. I just never knew how to follow. I didn't understand your world, your drive, so I tried to reroute it. That was wrong. I see now that your path was never meant to please anyone but you. I hope you find what I was too proud to give you, respect and peace." I didn't cry at the letter itself. I cried because he had written it at all. His voice, softened by the page, felt like a part of him finally seeing me, not the obedient daughter, not the problem solver, just me. 2 days later, I got the call. It was from a nonprofit I'd briefly volunteered with during my EMT rotation, an organization supporting veterans through health initiatives and storytelling. They remembered my work, my presence, and wanted me to join their team as a community outreach coordinator, based in Portland, the same city where I'd once applied for school, back when I still thought dreams required permission. Now it was an open door. And this time, I was walking through it not to escape, but to expand. All this time I wanted them to see me, I thought, staring at my reflection in the train window later that evening. Now, strangers believe in what I almost buried. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even triumphant. It was just right. Before I left, I stopped by Alma's one last time. We didn't exchange many words. Just sat for a while in her kitchen, sipping tea, letting the silence say what we didn't need to. On the way out, I gave her a tight hug. In Vera's mailbox, I left a note. "We both know we lost something. I just hope someday you'll search for it too." There was no signature. If she read it, she'd know. At the airport, waiting for my flight to board, I watched families hug, lovers argue softly, a toddler chase a plastic dinosaur across the gate floor. Life kept moving. I was finally moving with it. I used to think healing meant someone came back to fix what they broke. But now I knew. It meant leaving behind the pieces that didn't belong to me. And as the plane rose, so did something inside me I hadn't felt in years, myself. I stepped off the plane and into the stillness of Portland air, the kind of stillness that doesn't scream for attention but simply is. The air felt denser here, not heavy, just whole. The sky stretched wider than I remembered it could. I pulled my coat closer, though the breeze wasn't cold. It just felt like something new brushing against old armor. I took a long breath and smiled, not for show, not to convince anyone, but because something inside me had made room. The first few days in Portland were chaos wrapped in cardboard. My new apartment smelled like fresh paint and someone else's past. Boxes piled like walls I didn't know how to tear down. I unpacked the kettle first. I always start with heat, warmth, life. The next was a photo of me in my EMT gear, snapped mid-rescue. I didn't remember posing, but I looked alive, like I'd just chosen myself. That photo went on the fridge. Not to remember the past, but to prove it happened. On Wednesday, I ducked into a local cafe, hoping for caffeine strong enough to stir ambition. That's when I heard it. I don't know why they won't just see me, a voice cracked behind me. It's not like I'm asking them to be proud, just not ashamed. I turned. A young woman, probably in her early 20s, sat across from a friend. Tears welled but didn't fall. I didn't plan to interrupt, but my body moved before permission. I was you, I said gently. Or at least, I've been you. Her eyes widened. Sorry? I slid into the booth across from her with a smile that I hoped said safe. I wore uniforms that embarrassed my family. I made choices that looked like betrayal. I survived. You will, too. Her name was Jessie. She was studying film and dreaming too loudly for a family that preferred silence. We talked for hours, about art, about voice, about what it costs to walk away, and what it costs if you don't. As I left, she whispered, "Thanks for seeing me." No. Thank you, I thought, for reminding me I wasn't alone in the becoming. 2 days later, my phone buzzed. A local podcast called Second Bloom had seen Jessie's post. The host messaged, "We think your story could help others, especially women trying to grow in hostile gardens. Want to talk?" My fingers hovered above the screen. The old me would have deleted the message. The almost new me would have drafted a reply and never hit send. But the now me. I typed, "Let's bloom." At the studio, a soft light warmed the room. The host adjusted her mic. I adjusted my breath. I used to think invisibility was my best chance at peace, I began. But it wasn't peace, it was paralysis. I spoke of my journey, carefully but not timidly. I left names out but left nothing hidden. Every time I paused, the silence held me instead of drowning me. There's power in speaking before someone rewrites you. When we finished, the host wiped a tear. I didn't. I had already cried those tears. This time, I just stood in them. Jessie met me afterward. We walked together in the light drizzle, neither rushing nor hiding. I looked up and let the rain touch my face. Portland rain didn't weigh me down. It baptized. I woke up to a world louder than usual. My phone vibrated with a weight I hadn't expected, jeopardized peace but full of possibility. I sat up in my bed in Portland, the pale morning light filtering through the slats of the blinds, and saw dozens of messages, comments, emails. Some offered condolences. Some claimed they saw themselves in my story. Some simply said thank you. I slid out of bed and padded into the kitchen. I pressed the small kitchen table with my palms, my mind trying to sift through the static. Somewhere among the messages was one from an older woman named Elise. Her subject line, "A letter." My chest tightened. I opened it. Elise said she'd been following my podcast episode since it aired 2 days ago. She told a story that startled me. A near-identical childhood, a younger sibling praised, a parent's high expectations, and a long history of being told, "You're too much." She said it wasn't her fault, that sometimes children are carved into shapes they didn't ask for. My hands shook as I underlined passages, the way she was silenced, how every need of hers was considered an issue, how she believed she could change by being smaller. Then came the tie I never suspected. Elise had known Grandma Alma decades ago. She also spoke of a rift, of Grandma Alma leaving a generation unsettled, and how that pattern of emotional withholding was inherited. I felt dizzy reading it. Was this silence, this erasure, something that carried in our blood? I called Aunt Claudine, my mother's sister. She said yes, Grandma had once left home for a few months. Aunt Claudine never spoke of it in detail. It was something that hurt too much but healed too slowly. "You carry what she left behind," she said quietly. "Sometimes the past isn't silent. It's just invisible until you call it back into light." That evening, rain was soft against my window. I decided to walk. The pavement glistened. The drizzle didn't bother me. It felt like something had shifted inside me, and rain made space for that kind of change. Back home, I found a voicemail notification. My pulse bumped when I saw Julienne's name. Julienne had been a friend once, close enough that our paths overlapped in ways I thought I understood. I pressed play. "Hi, Mireille, it's Julienne." His voice was warm, messy with uncertainty. I heard your episode. I didn't know what to say, except that you spoke the words I couldn't, that you were brave. If you ever want to talk, I'm in Seattle now. I'm here." For a moment, I stood by the window watching water slide down the glass. My reflection blurred. His invitation weighed lightly in my chest, both comforting and complicated. I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I sat in my journal later that night, pen hovering above the page. I wrote, "For the first time, I feel like I'm writing forward instead of backward. No decision made about Julian yet, no plan for Seattle. Just thoughts, stretched open and honest. Sometimes the rain doesn't wash things away, it reveals what we buried." I stood in the courtyard of the Portland Courthouse Plaza beneath an overcast sky that promised rain. Around me, a small crowd had gathered, neighbors, friends I'd never met but who believed in me, and strangers who became witnesses. The banner overhead fluttered, "Truth, Integrity." I felt the weight of the past weeks in my bones, but also a heat in my chest I hadn't felt in years, the kind of strength built from being seen, finally. Late morning, a friend from the Rusted Valor Unit, Patricia, approached me with manila envelope in hand. Her face was serious but gentler than I expected. "Something I found," she said. Inside were old contract documents tied to something the family called the Wise Valor Fund, set up by Dad's estate years ago. As I looked, Patricia pointed to a clause. Vera had been granted control over disbursement of a scholarship fund under specific conditions that required certain parental and familial oversight. An oversight Vera had used to block the funds, even though I fulfilled all requirements years ago. The revelation hit hard. It wasn't just emotional betrayal anymore. It was legal, moral, undeniable. I didn't crumble. My lips pressed in a line. A kind of anger sharpened into clarity. By mid-afternoon, word had spread. Vera, pushed by public attention, was asked to speak at the plaza, on that makeshift stage with a microphone thrust into her hand. She hesitated. The wind picked up. Her hand shook. I want to say something," she began, voice cracking. Tears came uninvited. She admitted she had withheld those funds, twisted histories to maintain control. She said she believed she was protecting me, following guidelines she thought Dad had wanted. Her voice broke when she acknowledged the pain she caused. I stood silent, absorbing the confession, not closure, but exposure. "Vera," I finally said, stepping forward, voice steady under the gathering clouds. "This is not a victory, it's a rebirth." I raised my hand and addressed the crowd. My father believed in service, in courage, and in recognition. If this foundation can exist, I want to start one in his name, for young women in emergency services, for those overlooked, for those who were told their service didn't matter, because it does. Somewhere behind me, someone gasped. I turned, saw Vera collapsing, not in defeat, but heartbreak. I knelt, gently helped her up, not forgiving, but refusing to leave her broken in public. They say dawn follows the darkest storms. As the sky cracked open, light broke through. That evening, after the crowd dispersed, I went back to my small apartment. Windows open, rain beginning to patter again. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't expect peace overnight. But I felt something I'd waited years to trust, that I belong, not to their expectations, but to my own truth. We are not healed. But we stand together now, not as fragments, but as dawn. Sometimes the loudest battles are the ones fought in silence, and the deepest healing comes not from being understood, but from choosing to understand yourself. If you've walked through life carrying the weight of being unseen, unheard, or underestimated, I see you. And more importantly, I want you to see you, your voice, your worth, your power. One of the hardest lessons I've learned is this: speaking up won't always get you applause, but staying silent too long can cost you your soul. When I stopped waiting for permission to exist fully, the right people finally heard me, and more importantly, I heard myself. Let me ask you, have you ever been told you were too much? Too emotional, too ambitious, too loud, or maybe not enough? What did you do with that voice inside you that refused to shrink? I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. If this video touched something deep in you, drop a 1 in the comments, or tell me where you're watching from. And hey, if this wasn't your vibe, let me know what didn't work. I read every comment and your voice matters here. If this story moved you or gave you something to think about, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. There are so many more stories ahead, and who knows, one of them might just be yours.